Dee Alford's back, but why?
You are Locked On Falcons, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back, everyone, to another illustrious episode of the Locked On Falcons podcast, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can get $250 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. So if you do not know me, I'm your very humble host, Aaron Freeman, aka Mr. Drew, aka Sirius Black, aka Mr. AKA, and I've been covering the Atlanta Falcons for almost 2 decades, formerly at falcfans.com, RIP, still going strong on this podcast, and I thank each and every one of you that go strong with me as everydayers. That means you make this podcast your first listen each and every day. All you got to do to become an everydayer, subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts to get the latest episode as soon as it is available. So today we will be joined by Locked On 49ers co-host Brian Peacock to discuss Leonard Floyd and potentially what the 49ers might do at pick 11, as that has consequences for what the Falcons might do at 15. We'll talk about the Falcons' struggles to solve problems and also throw some shade at the American healthcare system in the process, I guess you could say. But we'll start off today's episode talking about the news of the day with the Falcons re-signing Dee Alford to a 1-year contract. And we know that this is a move that probably will not be met with cheers because Dee Alford's coming off a very rough year, sort of highlighted by his really dreadful performance against the Minnesota Vikings, which, was comically bad. It deserves to be memed to death with him, flailing all over the place or whatever. But I do think despite that one game sort of being the one that sticks out in the minds of Falcon fans everywhere when they think about Dee Alford's 2024 performance, I don't think he was absolutely awful last year. But as I broke down earlier this offseason, when we did the review of the Falcons cornerback room and talked about some of the issues that Dee Alford had, one of the things I highlighted then was that Dee Alford has this past year, based off my charting of the Falcons defense, faced a lot more number 1 and number 2 receivers than he did in previous years. And the problem with Dee Alford was that his play, when he wasn't facing that high caliber of receiver, fell off as well. And so based off my charting, over the last 3 years that Dee Alford has been in Atlanta, when he was charted against a number 1 or number 2 wide receiver, he allowed a 50% success rate in 2022, a 52% success rate in 23, and a 55% success rate in 2024. Those aren't good numbers, but they're mostly below average, right? So roughly the same, in the roughly the same range, right? But the difference was in 22 and 23, the percentage of actual targets he had based off my charting against a number 1 and number 2 receiver was 33% in 22, 36% of his targets in 23 were against a number 1 or number 2 receiver, but that spiked to 64% in 2024. And so that's why it just felt like over and over, more and more bad play from Dee Alford. And then when you look at his success against non-number 1 and number 2 receivers, so number 3 receiver, a running back, a tight end, those types of weapons. In 22, his success rate against those guys was 25%. His success rate in 23 was 39%. And then last year was 63%. So it was basically, it didn't matter, who he was facing, he was struggling against all those guys. And so, basically the book on Dee Alford is he's not quite good enough to handle the number 1s and number 2s that the Falcons going to face on a semi-regular basis in the slot, like Chris Godwin, Khalil Shakir, and later in other teams where they move their number 1 or number 2 into the slot, a percentage of the time, 25, 30% of the time, Tyreek Hill, Garrett Wilson, Chris Olave, et cetera, those types of guys. And last year especially, unlike the previous years where we saw good play from Dee Alford, he struggled against those number 3 receivers. He struggled against those tight ends and running backs, et cetera. Now, some of the conversation around why Dee Alford's play dropped off so significantly, you can, I think, blame the scheme on, right? This is where I think you would make the case for where the scheme hurt Dee Alford, particularly against those lesser competition, right? The non-number 2, 1s and 2s, right? Where going through my charting of the defense, a lot of those successful plays that he gave up to number 3 wide receivers and tight ends and running backs were on sort of dink and dunk throws, short completions and whatnot. And we know that this Falcons defense played a bend but don't break style and gave up a lot of easy completions. And so hopefully one of the things that you're hoping for and why Dee Alford potentially could bounce back with a change in scheme with Jeff Ulbrich, as we discussed on yesterday's episode, is that hopefully the Falcons will play a more aggressive style of defense and won't be as reliant on that bend but don't break. We're not going to give up the explosive plays. Basically the Falcons' philosophy last year was we don't want to give up the 50 or 60-yard play, but we're willing to concede the 5 and 6 yard play, right? And they were effective. I can't remember if they finished number 1, but for most of the last season, they were number 1 in giving up the fewest number of 20-plus yard plays last year, those explosive plays, but they were giving up the league's highest completion rate. So they were giving up easy completions and whatnot. And so hopefully we'll see the team adopt a more aggressive scheme that's not going to be so focused on, hey, we don't want to give a beat because we're going to play more aggressive and we don't want to give up the short stuff in addition to the long stuff. So those are hopefully that will lead to better play from Dee Alford. But at the end of the day, we know what Dee Alford's ceiling is, right? He is a competent CB3, right? That if he's going to be as tasked as he will be if he is the nickel cornerback this year to cover number 1 and number 2 receivers, as we've seen consistently over the last 3 years, he's not really the guy that's going to really slow those guys down in a major way. Maybe he can give you functional play at that in that role, but really he's, should be covering the 3rd best guy on opposing teams' offense. And so we'll see if the Falcons can get better play out of that nickel spot with Dee Alford returning. There's still an option. There's room for growth there. And the Falcons can still get that growth if they target that nickel cornerback spot in the draft. But I think bringing back Dee Alford means that there's a lot less urgency at the nickel cornerback spot, just because you have some internal options, something that I outlined back in February, that it does feel like the Falcons once again are proving themselves to be everydayers because they're following the sort of blueprint that I laid out back then, which is this idea of you prioritize upgrading the outside cornerback spot, and then you just sort of say, we'll get better play at the nickel cornerback spot through the power of competition, right? That the cream will rise to the top. And the way I outlined it back then, and it seems like it's setting up right now as we sit here today, and we'll see if this continues down this path, but you have at least a 3-way competition right now at the nickel cornerback spot between Dee Alford, Raheem Morris mentioned Clark Phillips last week at the owners' meetings as getting run at that nickel cornerback spot. That was something we talked about then back in February, as well as Natron Brooks also being in the mix there as well in terms of 3-way competition. And we'll see if Mike Hughes can be the 4th guy in that competition. And if he is, then probably Mike Hughes' job to lose. We know that Mike Hughes is a better outside corner than a slot guy. But at the very least, you can say, okay, through the power of competition, the Falcons should be able to get better play from this nickel cornerback spot than they had a year ago when they didn't really have a competition at that spot. So hopefully that this move means that the Falcons are going to do the thing that I want them to do, which is prioritize the outside cornerback spot in the draft, particularly on, with that 2nd round draft pick, right? As I suggested back in February, like that to me is the bigger concern when you're dealing with some of the matchups the Falcons are going to deal with in this 2025 season. And if they can find that solution, that long-term solution that you can stop the revolving door at that outside cornerback spot opposite AJ Terrell, maybe that will finally mean that the Falcons have solved a problem that has plagued this team since AJ Terrell's arrival in Atlanta 5 years ago. And that's a promising sign for this regime who has struggled to solve some of these problems that have been plaguing them since their arrival. And we'll break that down further as we continue today's Locked On Falcons. So I'm sure you've heard of Chewy because they have everything you need to keep your pet happy and healthy. Whether you're shopping for food, treats, or even pet healthcare, Chewy's going to make it fast, easy, and affordable. With over 100,000 products from all your favorite brands, Chewy has everything your pet needs, from food and treats to toys, beds, and grooming. And it's not just for dogs and cats. They've got supplies for birds, fish, reptiles, and even small pets too. And Chewy's going to make it easy to manage your pet's health with prescriptions, telehealth, vet visits, and even in-person vet clinics rolling out nationwide. And their auto ship feature is a game changer changer. You can set up automatic deliveries for food treats and any other essentials so that you never run out. And of course, you can cancel and change at any time. Chewy has everything you need to keep your pet healthy and happy. Right now, you can save $20 on your first order and get free shipping by going to chewy.com or clicking the link in the description below. Save $20 on your first order with free shipping by clicking the link in the description. Minimum purchase required. New customers only. Terms and conditions apply. See site for complete details. So one of the knocks that I've consistently had on the Terry Fontenot regime since his arrival in 2021 is that this regime has not done a great job solving problems, right? If you're going to praise them, you're going to say they've done a good job bandaging wounds, coming up with stopgap solutions. But in terms of getting that long-term answer at various positions, they have not done a great job at that. And sort of the analogy I'm going to use, and I got to give a disclaimer, do not seek Locked On Falcons for medical advice, but it's the idea that like you're doing something around the house or at work or whatever, and you wind up cutting yourself open, right? You get a gaping wound or whatever, and so you grab a towel and you got to put pressure on it to stop the bleeding. Maybe you wrap it in some duct tape or whatever to help apply more pressure, and then so once you slow down the bleeding, you got to come up with, okay, we can go to the hospital, get the stitches that we need so this thing can heal properly, or since the duct tape and the towel work pretty good, why not keep that going? And I know for the 5% of you that are international listeners here on the podcast, you're sitting here going, this is a ridiculous analogy, but this is the beauty of the American healthcare system, where these are the daily choices that we have to make in this country, given our healthcare system. But the worry is if you don't go to the hospital and get it sewn up, is the idea that later on, whatever you're doing today, tomorrow, whenever, you're going to re-injure that injury and it's going to start bleeding again, and you're just going to have to go through it all over again. And basically what I'm sitting here saying is like, Terry Fontenot, God bless America, is the most American GM out there, because this regime is really good at, the duct tape and paper towel solution, right? And the hope is that this draft that they will be much better at, taking us to the hospital and getting these things treated by a medical professional and whatnot. And so this is something that we discussed a little bit on yesterday's episode where, it's not the idea that, hey, if you just draft a rookie, an edge rusher in round one, as you've heard me harp over and over again on this podcast over the last several weeks and months, that's going to automatically solve your pass rush problems. It's really just kind of step one in a multi-step process that you can at least hopefully make a dent into your pass rush problem that has been plaguing you since Terry Fontenot and company got here. And again, it's been plaguing the Falcons for long before that. Terry would win so many people over if he can just solve that problem, but we'll cross that bridge when we get to it. And then when you look at the cornerback situation, that to me is the second priority, where it's like, okay, you get the edge in round one, you get the corner in round two, and hopefully you stop that revolving door opposite AJ Terrell, where you've had a different starting outside corner starting opposite AJ Terrell week one every single season, right? And even though Mike Hughes may be the first guy that will start 2 consecutive years, you don't look at Mike Hughes as a solution to the problem. He's just, again, a decent stopgap at that position, right? And we know that like finding that number 2 corner that complements AJ Terrell's skill set, right? The guy that can deal with maybe the bigger wide receivers that we know AJ historically has struggled against, that you're going to face this upcoming season. You still got Mike Evans on the schedule, Keon Coleman, Marvin Harrison Jr., Michael Pittman Jr. And, while they're not on the regular season schedule, hopefully one day soon we will see the Falcons playing the Philadelphia Eagles in the postseason. And you got to deal with a guy like AJ Brown in that situation. And it's not just the big guys that you have to deal with at that number 2 cornerback and wide receiver spot. You still got to deal with the quick, fast guys, right? Jordan Addison, he tore you a new one last year while AJ Terrell was dealing with Justin Jefferson in that Vikings game. Are you going to run it back with Mike Hughes and expect that to change, right? It's, especially now Dee Alford's coming back, it's like, that's not changing, right? And, you look at a team like the Rams this year, right, where they added Devontae Adams, and it's like, who's the number 1? Who's the number 2? Him or Puka Nacua? And it's like, probably based off of how Sean McVay usually structures the offense, probably still be Puka Nacua will be the primary breadwinner. So, okay, you're going to put AJ Terrell and Puka Nacua, you don't want to put Mike Hughes on Devontae Adams. That does not look like a great combination. And so that's why you're going to continue to hear me die on this hill, basically saying edge and corner need to be your 1 and 2 priorities going into this draft. That if you don't solve these problems, if you don't try to solve these problems with draft picks this year, your defense is just going to continue to get annihilated. And that's why I continue to be dismissive of, taking a D tackle or taking a safety or linebacker, or even now an offensive tackle has entered the chat when it comes to alternative options in rounds 1 and 2 and whatnot. And so it's like, when you play the Rams this year, like, you're not going to be able to get any, if you don't try to solve these problems and you're facing the Rams this year, you're not going to be able to get pressure on Matthew Stafford. And, even if you feel like AJ Terrell is going to lock down his side of the field, whether it's Puka Nacua or Devontae Adams, you don't feel good about whoever's going to line up on the other opposite side of the field. And you're basically like, okay, we got to win a shootout against the Rams. And it's like, okay, well, Michael Penix and the weapons, like, we feel good about that. But the Rams got Jared Verse. They got, Byron Young and Kobe Turner and Braden Fisk. Who the Falcons got? And so I would much rather have those guys trying to slow down this Falcons offense in a shootout than whoever the Falcons have trying to slow down Matt Stafford in a shootout. So again, not to sit here and say that, if you draft a rookie, these problems just magically go away and you're going to plug in a rookie and he's going to lock down Devontae Adams or whatnot. But it's one of those things where, like, that problem's definitely not going away if you just ignore it and don't take a rookie, right? And so to me, that's the conversation. Can the Falcons thread this needle in terms of solving this problem? And time will tell on that. We'll find out in 2.5 weeks. And ultimately in several months when the season happens. But contrary to popular opinion, I do have some hope. But it is just funny to me, every time I hear someone bring up, Malachi Starks or Jahad Campbell or Kenneth Grant or whoever, as a non-edge rusher in round 1, I'm just like, what are we doing here, guys? It just feels like, we're that meme where the Falcons are sitting here, sweating over which button to press. Where they're like, on one hand, it's like, duct tape and paper towel, or go to the hospital and get sewn up as they're bleeding out on the carpet. And it's just like, to me, not going edge, not going corner with those first 2 picks. It's just like, it's duct tape and paper towel all over again. So that's why I tend to be so passionate and frustrated about it, because I just feel like I'm taking crazy pills. Like, this is a hard choice. Like, oh man, what do we choose? Like, who votes for going to the hospital? And I'm like raising my hand, and everybody was like, who votes for duct tape and a paper towel? And it's like, everybody else is like, me. And I'm like, what are we doing here, guys? Like, so let me know, instead of buying insurance, what paper towel brand do you feel like, or are you riding for? Are you standing for, right? That is the official paper towel brand of the Atlanta Falcons. Are you a Brawny person? Are you a Bounty person? I happen to be a Bounty person when it comes to this sort of thing. Are you a Viva? Are you going for the generic brands or whatnot? Kirkland's Signature and all that stuff. So let me know in the comments which paper towel brand that you are a supporter of and that you feel like can get this Falcon team to the next level if they continue down this paper towel and the duct tape strategy instead of, doing something crazy like having insurance or whatnot. But hey, man, America, baby. So that will do it for us here on this conversation about, solving problems. We'll see if Leonard Floyd potentially solves the Falcons' pass rush problems. We'll talk with Locked On 49ers host Brian Peacock. Come for the Leonard Floyd discussion, but stay for the discussion of what the 49ers may do at pick 11, because one of the edges that the Falcons may be eyeing at pick 15 could also be on the 49ers radar. And we'll get into all of that, guys, as we wrap up today's Locked On Falcons. So the NBA playoffs are almost here, and FanDuel is going to give new customers an incredible way to get in on that playoff action. Right now, when you join FanDuel and place your first $5 bet, you'll get $250 in bonus bets if that first bet wins. And we love FanDuel here, especially even if we're Atlanta Hawks fans and we're, resigned for that play-in game. There's so many ways that you can win despite, the Hawks not necessarily winning enough to not be in the play-in game, because, player props, you can bet on the Dyson Daniels steals over unders for your game. And then, after the game tips off, you can combine those live props into a single bet for a same game parlay for a chance to win big. So don't miss out by heading over to FanDuel.com and claim your $250 in bonus bets today. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we are back with another illustrious guest. He is Brian Peacock, the co-host of the Locked On 49ers podcast, and he is here with us to talk about the savior of the Atlanta Falcons pass rush, none other than former 49ers, former Rams, former Bills, former Bears pass rusher, Leonard Floyd. Brian, my friend, welcome back to Locked On Falcons.
Aaron, love being on your show. Thanks for having me on. And you kind of laid it out there with how many teams he's been on. Leonard Floyd's like the ultimate mercenary now in the NFL.
Yeah, that was basically my first question is like, he's been this mercenary player. I'm sure there were expectations that he would be a productive mercenary in San Francisco this past year. Did he live up to those expectations in your eyes?
Yeah, I think so. Overall, the 49ers were a huge letdown, and I think the defensive line was part of that. So from a 49ers perspective, I think they brought in Malik Collins as well, Leonard Floyd, and they had professional football players, but they weren't necessarily impact football players. And I think that's kind of what Leonard Floyd is at this point in his career. Ideally he's probably a number 3 edge guy for you, and not being asked to be a number 1. And he's across from a number 1 and maybe is in a timeshare and a rotational role with another maybe bigger defensive end or something like that. Would probably be the ideal role for Leonard Floyd. And that's pretty much exactly what he was for the 49ers last year. But he's also a pro, and he's going to show up. He's played in the league for a long time. I think he's in year 10 now. And he's played every game for those teams just about over the last 5 years. And that's kind of hard to find in the NFL. He's one of the few players that wasn't hurt all year for the 49ers last year. So I think sort of consistent and a player you can count on is probably the most important thing you could say about Leonard Floyd right now. Is you're going to get a pro that should be able to help your football team, but you probably shouldn't expect somebody who's going to be, the difference-making player that the Bears were drafting in 2016.
Yeah, well, they say availability is best ability. So if he's available, he's at his best. But I'm curious, when it came to this offseason, when he approached free agency, was there any talk of bringing him back, or was it kind of already a foregone conclusion that the 49ers might go younger there?
Yeah, I think for the 49ers, it was kind of a thing where it's like, okay, well, who is actually who can, because the 49ers are trying to get their books right, and they're about to spend a whole bunch of money on a quarterback. And so it kind of changes things. And they're like, look, we're going to spend this much cash on our football team this year. Which players can we not afford to lose? And they realized that Leonard Floyd was probably on the bad side of that, not the good side of that, where it's like, well, look, we got 11 draft picks. We should be able to draft a rotational edge player in this deep defensive line draft that can replace the snaps that Leonard Floyd gave us, even if, there's some development and, maybe that player isn't as good as Leonard Floyd on day one. He should be able to get there by the end of the season, or at some point your day 1 or 2 pick should be able to get there and be that player for you. And you can spend dollars elsewhere. So I think it was more financial than them saying, oh, we really don't like Leonard Floyd as a player. Because he was good for the 49ers, and like 8.5 sacks. It's funny because I look at his stats and think 8.5 sacks, and I knew his numbers were right in there for the 49ers last year, but it didn't really feel like he was like, oh, this guy is just getting after the quarterback and really making it hard for the opposing team to do what they do. He was just kind of like, to be honest with you, even though he had 8.5 sacks, the thing that impressed me about Leonard Floyd, who's listed 6'3", 240, he's not the biggest guy, and you think, okay, he's all speed all the time. He's actually kind of down to do the dirty work too, and he's surprisingly strong and stout against the run when he needs to be. Now, he's not a power player or anything like that, but I mean, he's just solid. You're going to get a pro. He's going to be solid. He's going to be okay against the run. He's going to give you some pass rush, and he's going to, have a certain amount of motor and a certain amount of work ethic, and he's going to fit into your program and do what needs to be done. And maybe that might be only for 1 year at a time at this point in his NFL career. He's a pro, and he's going to be part of your rotation, and he'll be fine.
Yeah. Well, Brian, I appreciate your insight into Leonard Floyd, but I'm also curious. You mentioned the 49ers may be in the market to take another pass rusher high in the draft. They're picking 11, and that's interesting to me as a Locked On Falcons host, because the Falcons are in the market to take a pass rusher very high in the draft, and I'm very curious if maybe the 49ers are going to potentially steal the Falcons' thunder by taking the guy that is the apple of their eye. And so I'm curious, is that on the table for pick 11? And is there one or two players that maybe you're keying in on as the potential option for the 49ers there?
Yeah, I can almost guarantee the 49ers are going to draft either Mike Green or James Pierce. I'm just kidding. I was trying to guess which guys you want the Falcons to draft and try to pick those names.
Okay.
Everybody's in play. This draft is really hard, Aaron. I can't figure out, like, no prospects aside from like two guys in the entire class really check a lot of boxes. So it's like, and I just had this argument with, not really an argument, but a conversation with my guy, Eric Crocker, co-host of Locked On 49ers. Like, do you chase upside in this draft at pick 11? Do you chase like a safe player and you're looking more at the floor because you don't want to miss? Because a guy like Shamar Stewart scares the crap out of me. I don't really love the tape. If you can't get to the quarterback, you're going to draft that kind of a defensive end in the top 15. I don't know if I love that. Mike Green's got off field, but I love his pass rush ability. I love Walter Nolan. To be honest with you, he might be one of my favorite picks for the Niners at 11, a defensive tackle, but he's got some character stuff. And speaking of mercenaries, he's been a mercenary since he was 15. He was like on 3 high school teams already getting paid back then, 2 different colleges that no doubt NIL played a factor in that. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? So I don't even know, man. But there's going to be a good defensive lineman on the board for the Niners and the Falcons. It's just like, who checks the most boxes? And that's kind of the hard thing for me to figure out right now.
Yeah, that's been my thoughts on this draft class, where it's just like, I have no idea how the board is going to fall, where it's like, usually I can rely on like the consensus board and like, it will stray a little bit, one or a couple of teams will stray off of that, like the Falcons did last year when they took Michael Penix and whatnot. But like, for the most part, I think this is one of those drafts where everybody might stray from the consensus board, and like there'll be players that people are projecting in round 2 that go in the middle of the first round, and guys that go in the middle of the first round that will fall to like day 3 or something like that. So I have no idea what's going to happen in this draft.
I think it's hilarious that you think that the Falcons are actually going to fix their problem at that selection. They're going to do something weird, right? Like, what? Yeah. Do you have a favorite guy, by the way?
Not really. I'm leaning more towards Mike Green as we get closer to the end of it. Just bet on the traits and the athleticism, and maybe that will solve the Falcons' pass rush issues. But
I mean, aside from Carter, I think he's the best pass rusher. Like, he's watered downhill, man. He's got moves on top of moves. He's got counters. He gets to the quarterback. He can finish. When he gets close to the quarterback, he can get there with speed. He shows some power as well. He's the complete package. So it's like, it's all about the off-field stuff there, or else he might not even get to where the Falcons are. I like him a lot. I did a good job guessing who your guy was going to be.
Okay. Well, we'll see. We'll see if we're talking about Shamar Stewart or Mykel Williams or Jalen Walker. Or
I get the feeling that the league, at least for me personally, the league is going to be higher than I am on both Shamar Stewart and Mykel Williams. And I wouldn't be shocked if one of those players goes to the Niners at 11. And I wouldn't be shocked if both of them are off the board before the Falcons even pick, because the league is just enamored with the prototype size and some of the ability and measurables that those guys have. And coaches think they're going to be able to coach them up. I don't really love either one of those guys, but I think the league is going to be higher on them than I am.
Yeah, I mean, who's the 49ers D-line coach again?
Chris Kuceric.
Okay. And it feels like the 49ers have been betting on other teams' first and second round picks that didn't pay off, like Yetur Gross-Matos and Cleveland Farrell these last couple of years, and just sort of like, well, we'll coach them up. So that does feel like something the 49ers could do, where it was like, we'll take Shamar Stewart, we'll take Mykel Williams.
And like the Kinlaw thing a few years ago in the draft is like, oh man, the high end reps, we like those. And it's like, but there's a lot of low end stuff too as well. And it's like, I don't care. The thing for Chris Kuceric is all about the get off. He likes the guys that explode out of their stance and can get off and penetrate immediately. And so that's probably where you should probably look if you're trying to mock a defensive lineman to the 49ers.
Well, I appreciate the insight, Brian. I appreciate your thoughts on Leonard Floyd. Go ahead and plug, what some of the things you and Eric are be talking about on Locked On 49ers over the next couple of weeks.
Yeah. All kinds of prospects. We're just it's full on draft mode right now. We're breaking down all the prospects, having conversations about how the best way to attack the board for the San Francisco 49ers, the pivotal draft for the Niners. And also, you can find me doing Peacock and Williamson, breaking down the entire league daily on the Locked On Podcast Network as well. And of course, be on the lookout for this year's NFL mock draft special, which will feature all of us as we make our mock draft picks for our respective teams. in the NFL. And I've been hosting that for many years now. It's always a fun project, which we are in pre-production, and the picks are being made behind the scenes, and we're about to start recording that thing as well.
There you go. So, guys, that's going to do it for us here on today's Locked On Falcons. Thanks to Brian Peacock for sharing his insight into Leonard Floyd. Tomorrow I think we'll be joined by Trayshawn Diaz of the Falcoholic and talk about, what this team can do from a draft standpoint. And maybe we'll discuss, an alternative option where the whole Kelvin Banks interest is part of a, smokescreen to lure other teams to trade up in round one. So that may be one of several topics that we discuss on tomorrow's episode with Trayshawn. So continue to make Locked On Falcons your first listen. Make sure you subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts to continue to do so. And check out Locked On NFL Draft Podcast with Keith Sanchez and Damian Parsons to get updated on the latest with all things 2025 NFL Draft. It is all part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.